Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Current Affairs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Paige Fullman. So, long time to talk. I accidentally took 2 weeks off. It was just a crazy couple of weeks. I got a new job that I start on when this episode comes out. So as of right now, I'm starting a new job. And my friends were in town last weekend, so things just got a little chaotic and I simply didn't record. I'm a one-woman show over here. So if I don't do it, nothing gets posted. Nothing got posted. But now I'm back, and the last couple weeks in headlines have been a little crazy, but the one thing that really kept popping up was Jeffrey Epstein. And a lot of the headlines, I felt like I feel like a lot of news, they're a continuation of an old story. And people, forget the little details that happened years and years ago. And, then we get here, where people are reading headlines and going, oh, what was that thing that happened a few years ago? Wish I remembered. So I'm hoping to kind of try and give the Epstein story from the jump. I'm certainly not an Epstein expert. A lot of this was compiled from the Filthy Rich documentary on Netflix, as well as news stories. And I'm hoping that this will give a little bit of clarity to the whole situation and really just be a good jumping off point for everybody for the news articles coming out. The other thing I want to say is, if you're listening to this as part of my reels are not my typical background. I have a desk that I flip around so that my background is a wall, and I'm simply recording this in a rush and didn't want to turn my desk around. Anyways, I'm like a hot mess express. But we're going to start with the Epstein story and then kind of go into how this is wrapping up into today with Donald Trump and the DOJ. So much is going on. Anyways, let's get into it. So Jeffrey Epstein was not somebody who was born into wealth or elite power. He was born and raised in Coney Island, New York. He was very bright as a kid and even skipped a couple of grades. He attended Cooper Union for college and studied physics, but did not obtain a degree from them. He started out as a math teacher at the prestigious Dalton School in New York City, which nobody knows really how that happened. And it probably started his thinking of, I can get away with anything, because he did not finish college. He did not have a degree in teaching, and somehow he was teaching at this very, very prestigious school. After leaving teaching at Dalton, he quickly moved into finance in 1976. Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns said a trustee at Dalton told him that he had a guy named Jeff Epstein who wanted to move to Wall Street. Epstein was hired and was very good at his job, but it was found out that he lied all over his application when they checked especially his education. None of it was real. It was all fabricated. Keep in mind, he never had a college degree. Jeff admitted to lying up and down his application on the education portion and was able to weasel his way into keeping his job. He was eventually fired for, this was according to the documentary, quote, breaking some rules, but only after becoming a limited partner at Bear Stearns. He soon after that met Steve Hoffenberg, who propelled him into being the real moneymaker and billionaire that we now see him as, the kind with the private planes and the private islands and the residences in different countries and all across the US. So Steve Hoffenberg was a part of Towers Financial, which turned out to be a massive Ponzi scheme. Steve Hoffenberg was in the documentary that I watched on this, and he says himself, Jeff was this big, sales guy, and, he could sell you on anything, and he literally says this was important because we were running a Ponzi scheme. So, full and well, Jeff was on the inside of a pyramid scheme, and apparently did not catch any flack for it at all. Hoffenberg also noted that Epstein had an extraordinary ability to manipulate and control crowds. He was a secret keeper and often held those secrets over people's heads. I think, Steve was trying to imply that that's probably how he moved into his sexual escapades as well. Epstein's even bigger break with money came when he gained the trust of billionaire Les Wexner in about 1986. Now, Les Wexner is the man behind Victoria's Secret. He's, also a billionaire, a very wealthy, very powerful guy. And Wexner gave Epstein sweeping control of all of Wexner's finances, including power of attorney. With that kind of financial backing and the money that Wexner was paying Epstein, this further propelled everything. And also allowed Epstein to build this private empire that was cloaked in these elite social circles that Wexner was now a part of. Wexner claims that he cut ties with Epstein in 2007. So this is post the start of the sexual charges starting to come out. In 2007, after Epstein stole millions of dollars from him but Wexner did not press charges. During this time, there is some evidence that Epstein did also use his connection with Wexner and Victoria's Secret to approach young women. By 2003, he had a very Gatsby-like characterization in New York. People knew he had money, but they had no idea where the money came from or where Epstein came from. Again, considering he was not a Nepo baby, they didn't know his parents. He was just this person kind of clouded in mystery. Everybody knew the name, but nobody had any idea about him. And that same year, Vicky Ward started to write a social article in Vanity Fair about Jeffrey Epstein. As she interviewed people, it started to become more of an investigative piece into his sexual abuse of women. As part of that article, Vicky Ward interviewed a pair of sisters where abuse dates back to as far as 1995. One of the sisters was lured by the prospect of upping her resume in preparation for applying to the Ivies. Epstein and Maxwell basically said, come overseas, you can add this to your resume, and this is going to make you a better candidate, whatever. However, before doing the international portion of this trip, Maxwell and Epstein were like, hey, why don't you come to our mansion in New Mexico and just hang out with us, like get to know each other and be buddies. Almost immediately after getting there, Ghislaine massages her and groomed her to then be assaulted by Epstein. The sister who had kind of introduced the younger sister to Epstein and Maxwell was an aspiring artist and was also abused by Epstein in a home behind Les Wexner's Ohio mansion. Additionally, when Epstein and Maxwell left the artist, photographs of her sisters were mysteriously missing. She was working on a series of paintings using her sisters as, I don't want to say models because they weren't necessarily paintings of the pictures, but as inspiration. And they were pictures of them scantily dressed, I guess is the best way to say it. Not nude, but a little suggestive. And those photos went missing after Maxwell and Epstein left the property. The artist reported it to the New York Police Department, who then referred her to the FBI. The FBI took the report, and the sisters never heard anything about it after that. For a while, when Vicky Ward took their story to Epstein for comment, he told Ward the young girls were infatuated with him and retaliating against him. The full story was never published by Vanity Fair, and Vanity Fair maintains that it was not a cover-up and that the author's reporting and research was not strong enough to warrant publication. Now, in this article, I believe, is when they get the quote from Donald Trump that says, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy." I bet Donald Trump wishes that he could take that comment back because it's always coming back to haunt him. Now, we're jumping around a little bit because this guy was committing crimes left and right all over the place. In 2001, so we're going back a couple years before the Vanity Fair article that never got published in its investigative state. In 2001, Epstein goes to the Palm Beach Police Department to talk about making a donation to the police department. I'm giving you time to think about that because to me that was a don't look over here type of money. In 2003, neighbors in Palm Beach say young women are going to and from his residence, suspiciously young women that look like they might be underage. The police do a light investigation, and the women that the police saw were over the age of 18, so they kind of dropped it. It turns out, in a surprise to literally nobody now, he was running a massage and assault ring with local high school girls, complete with recruiting fees. So basically how this would work is there was a couple girls that were recruited by Maxwell herself, the people at the top of this recruiting ring, for lack of a better word. And then on their way out or in a second encounter, Epstein or Maxwell or, somebody would be like, hey, if you bring your friends, we will give you, $50, $100 if you bring somebody with you next time. And that kind of guaranteed you would bring somebody else and then you would not then be assaulted and coerced into sexual acts. However, it seems like this empire got to be a little bit too big because a victim, well, actually her mother, eventually came forward. She came forward because the daughter had suspiciously a large amount of cash, and the mom was like, where'd you get this cash? And the whole story came tumbling out. So the first victim to end up in front of police to tell her story was 14 years old. As victims would come to be interviewed, they would tell more names of victims, and the numbers began to multiply. This is where you're getting, okay, you went to Epstein's house, who did you bring? And they were basically building this spider web of victims. It was literally a pyramid scheme of sexual assault victims. The girls were lured mostly by their own friends or acquaintances who would vaguely mention a way to make money. Some did mention that it was to massage old guys. He would specifically target girls from West Palm Beach, which is a more working class area near Epstein's home. It's not on Billionaires Row or whatever that road is. Victims did report that they would tell him how old they were, and Epstein would not flinch. One of the most infamous victims from this time frame and investigation was Virginia Giuffre. Virginia was employed at Mar-a-Lago, like the Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Mar-a-Lago, as a locker room attendant. She had dreams of becoming a massage therapist and quickly met Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell said she knew a guy looking for a traveling masseuse and invited Giuffre over to meet the apparent guy. Spoiler alert, the guy was Jeffrey Epstein. Virginia went over and, of course, was quickly asked to undress for the massage and coerced into a sexual encounter. Virginia admits she did not ask many questions of Epstein, and this quickly moved her up the ladder in Epstein's mind. Virginia says she was then trafficked to, quote, politicians, businessmen, and powerful people. She also claims Epstein told her he would never get caught because he owns the Palm Beach Police Department. Police in Palm Beach launched an investigation in 2005 after the 14-year-old girl came forward. Dozens of victims followed. The FBI was brought in, and they built what should have been a bulletproof case, in secret, moving very carefully so as to not tip off Epstein. Victims did vary in their response to being contacted by investigators. Some were thankful to have been contacted. Others were, in fact, infatuated with Epstein and told investigators that they were going to marry him. And there were others that said they did not want to recount their experience, some for fear of retaliation, some, I'm sure, because they were traumatized. Victims were very hesitant to prosecute as well, clearly fearful of what may happen to them due to Epstein's power and connections. Despite the police trying to do this very carefully and not, tip them off, Epstein did find out that they were lurking. He began to build up a defense team with the help of none other than Alan Dershowitz. Now, if you don't remember who Alan Dershowitz is, he was part of the squad that defended O.J. Simpson. Also, he defended Harvey Weinstein. So notoriously, I would say, he defends bad people. Now, he couldn't directly defend Jeffrey Epstein because he was not a member of the Florida bar. However, rest assured, I'm sure Alan Dershowitz would have jumped at the chance to defend Jeffrey Epstein if he was a member of the Florida bar. Anyways, the defense team that he assembled still quickly began to intimidate the victims and the detectives themselves and the victims' lawyers by looking into their trash and their pasts and really trying to find anything that they could use to attack them. He had people surveilled nearly 24/7. He had the resources to intimidate, and he used them. Eventually, somehow, someway, there's no really definitive answer on why this happened. State Attorney Barry Krishner started to back down, going from, we're going to string him up, to discounting witnesses and saying it was a weak case. Then the charges were limited to solicitation and prostitution instead of unlawful sex with a minor. Local news stations were threatened to not run the story. And then the police chief sidestepped the state's attorney and went to the feds and asked them to prosecute. So the police chief was the only one, it seems like, actually doing his job. And now this is where the original 1996 report by the two sisters comes back. In 2006, the federal officers finally went to get more information from them. As the investigation continued, things started to shift when Palm Beach PD would call the feds. They'd stop answering, giving runaround answers. They knew that something was up and it wasn't looking good. Instead of getting serious prison time by the feds coming in, Epstein got the deal of a lifetime in 2008. 13 months in a county jail, a non-prosecution agreement, and work release privileges where he spent most of his sentence out of jail. It was signed off by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta. Now, you might be sitting there going, that name sounds familiar. I'll tell you where it's from. Alex Acosta served as Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor from 2017 to 2019. The guy who let Jeffrey Epstein go was Donald Trump's cabinet member. Now, throughout all of this, Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein have been friends. He was at one of the weddings of Donald Trump. He was in pictures of Donald Trump and Melania. So Jeffrey Epstein has been ever present, to say the least, in Donald Trump's life. It is also around this time that Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday happens, and the now infamous, card that the Wall Street Journal recently published goes to Jeffrey Epstein with Donald Trump's weird drawing of a naked woman and saying, "Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." Now, in response to this, Donald Trump says, "I never wrote a picture in my life. I don't draw pictures of women. It's not my language. It's not my words." Okay, fine. We'll get back to that one. So nothing happens to Epstein in the early 2000s. In a 2012 deposition where the victims tried to go after him civilly, Epstein pleaded the fifth for a whole slew of questions about whether or not he solicited minors for prostitutions. He ignored questions about having a sexual past with Les Wexner. And you can see him in the footage of the deposition. He gets very clearly agitated with the questions. The footage is in the documentary Filthy Rich on Netflix, but you can see him getting offended. At one point, one of the lawyers for the victims asks him, I'm like, not that my episodes are monetized, but I don't think this is going to help. One of the lawyers asked him, like, oh, is your penis eggplant shaped? And you can see him, like, start to squirm. So you can, like, he's got a very fragile ego. And you can just tell that, like, him pleading the fifth is, like, almost makes him, like, really excited. Like, it's real weird. Anyways, 2019, after years of pressure from journalists and survivors, Epstein is finally arrested on federal sex trafficking charges. A month later, he dies in a Manhattan jail cell. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Unofficially, the conspiracy theories exploded. Questions still linger about how someone with dirt on so many powerful men ended up dead under such, I guess, suspicious circumstances. His partner, Ghislaine Maxwell, was later arrested and convicted of trafficking underage girls. She is now serving 20 years, but she's back in the headlines for new reasons. So, let's move to what's happening now. In the last few weeks, really everything's been reignited. As Donald Trump said it in the Oval Office, Jeffrey Epstein is the guy that never dies. He really is. So let's start, I guess, with the right-wing fanning of the flames. So for the past, ever since I feel like Donald Trump's been in office, they wouldn't shut up about the, quote, Epstein list. Donald Trump was promising to release the files. Other talking heads are chiming in to do the same. In the first month of this current presidency, Attorney General Pam Bondi released a binder of files to a group of right-wing influencers that said on the cover, the Epstein Files Phase 1. Bondi also said all the documents, including the infamous client list, are sitting on her desk for review. So the other, right-wing fanning of this is the fact that they're like, oh, Bill Clinton's on the list. Oh, all these Democrats are on the list, and like never mentioning that a Republican could ever possibly be on this list. Now, they say that and like, I think expect Democrats to be like, no, don't release the list. If Bill Clinton is on the list, arrest him. If any, known Democrat, whatever, whoever is on the list, arrest them. Like, I don't understand this thought that like only Democrats could possibly be on this list and like that's why it needs to be released, like whatever. Now Trump started saying the files don't exist and everyone should just stop talking about Epstein. Now, this did not sit well with people. This is when the Wall Street Journal releases their article about the birthday card that Donald Trump wrote to Jeffrey Epstein, where he draws a naked woman, the one I read a little bit earlier. Trump in turn sues the Wall Street Journal for I think like $2 billion, like something insane. Then it comes out a couple of days later that Bondi had gone to Trump and said, hey, bestie, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but your name is in those documents. So I don't know what to tell you. So you can take what you will from that. Like that's kind of all the information that we have right now. But Donald Trump is clearly after this been like antsy. He like really wants the story to just stop. Marjorie Taylor Greene has broken rank and said like, oh, we need to release all the files right now. Like it's very much causing a divide in the Republican Party. However, I think Donald Trump is just hoping that, eventually the news cycle just moves past it and we start talking about something else. In my humble opinion, I don't think there is a client list. I think that would be an incredibly stupid thing for Epstein to have. I think there are lots of people that he knows, not all of which, and like spent time with, and not all of them committed acts of sexual abuse and assault. But I don't think that there is a list of all the people that committed sexual assault to minors in, under the purview of Jeffrey Epstein. What I do think they have, however, and they've like floated this idea to release the grand jury documents. Now, the grand jury documents is going to have a lot of witness testimony, and a lot of that, I believe that is where Pam Bondi is saying Donald Trump's name comes up, because that would be an instance of where the lawyers would be asking, okay, you were sexually assaulted on like this occasion, like who else was there, like who was at this party, who else bore witness to this. things like that, where a lot of famous people's names would come up. But again, not every person that was at a party was sexually assaulting young women, I believe. I choose to believe that there were some people that were not privy to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. However, I do think that Donald Trump knows more than he's letting on, and he is desperate for this story to die down. However, when you have the guy who let Jeffrey Epstein go in your first cabinet, and you have Pam Bondi who said, this is just part one, the files are sitting on my desk, like waiting for my review to release them, and you have influencers over and they get a binder full of documents that have already been released to the public, by the way, and the Trumps are in them, but like, okay, whatever. Like, he's expecting this to blow over when he's literally conditioned his base for years to be expecting this of him. For years, he would rile up his base with, the Clintons are in the documents, like, we need to release these, like, everybody needs to be arrested. And now it's just, to go from that to the files don't exist is wild. Because I do think that, like, the quote-unquote client list that everybody gets so, like, hot and bothered by, I don't think that exists. But to say that there are no documents ever, there is not a single document, is a little bit, like, that's not believable. Like, you can't do that big of a 180. To move on to Ghislaine Maxwell. So after all this, like, news fodder, Ghislaine Maxwell pops up and she was like, I would like to speak to Congress, please. Because then there was a huge fight and Mike Johnson shut down the House because they were going to vote to try to compel the DOJ to release the Epstein files, or at least, like, have somebody come to Congress and testify in front of Congress. And he didn't want that to happen because they would have had the votes. It would have been all the Democrats and then those few Republicans that are breaking rank on the Epstein stuff. So Ghislaine Maxwell enters the picture and she's like, wait, I'd like to volunteer myself, please. I'd like to go and speak to them. Trump administration weasels their way in and sends a lawyer to go meet with her, and also moves Ghislaine from a maximum security prison to a minimum security prison in Texas. Trump keeps saying that's so normal. That's not normal. That's not normal. Now, rumor has it, unconfirmed, rumor has it Ghislaine's lawyer is looking for a pardon from Trump. And Ghislaine also, I saw one headline the other day that was like, Maxwell says that she never witnessed Donald Trump do anything bad. Now, if you hypothetically were a 60-year-old woman in prison for the next 20 years and your only hope for a pardon was from this guy who you probably know did some bad things, but you know he's nuts and he cares about the headline so much, would you too not say that he did nothing wrong? Like, and she has a track record of, like, saying whatever the person she's talking to wants to hear. So if she testifies in front of Congress, I would not believe a word that she has to say. Period. She is a known fibber, for lack of a better word, and is really only out for herself, which, you know, I can't blame her, but she very well is, like, the world's most hated woman at this point, and she's trying to save herself and get that pardon. And the only way to do that is to lube up Donald Trump with compliments. Another part of this was that at a certain point, the House was trying to get its hands on the grand jury documents. This was before Mike Johnson closed the House because he didn't want that vote to happen. The DOJ said it was supporting transparency. However, a federal judge rejected the request, citing confidentiality rules. Again, a lot of those grand jury documents are going to be, like, speculation. I don't want to say speculation and rumor because it is people's, like, personal accounts, but it's going to have a lot of names that mean nothing. And we know how, like, the media and internet works. A victim or whoever mentions a name, it's going to, you know, blow up in flames about, like, this person is a pedophile, da da da, when, like, that's not necessarily what it means. I'm not trying to protect people that did bad things, but these grand jury documents are going to have a lot of names, and a lot of names that end up not really being instrumental in what Epstein was doing, and probably did no wrong except for being at a party that Epstein was at. And I do want to go back a little bit to Trump saying, like, trying to distance himself from Epstein. Like, I do want to talk about this right-wing, like, delusion, I guess is the best word, that Trump was not as close to, like I don't even know how to phrase this. It's the fact that when we're talking about Epstein, Republicans cannot fathom that Donald Trump might be wrapped up in this. Like, and I don't really understand if they don't believe, like, because we've all seen the pictures. We've all seen the pictures of Trump and Epstein, and Ghislaine and Melania hanging out together. We've now all seen the pictures of Epstein at Trump and Marla Maples, I think it was, I don't know, one of his other wives' weddings. Like, we've all seen those pictures. Like, they were buddies in New York and in Palm Beach. They were living in the same places together. And they're just, I don't know if it's like a cognitive dissonance thing or what, but they cannot fathom that Donald Trump could potentially be involved in this. And even the Republicans that are like calling for the release of these files, like, it makes me wonder about if some of these files came out and like Donald Trump was explicitly mentioned in them, like, now what? What's the new line? And ultimately, you know, this goes against everything that they report to hate. Like, it's covering for the elites of the world, and it's covering for the elites of the world that did bad and horrible things, that abused young girls or knew about the abuse of young girls and did nothing about it. That's a bit of a problem. Not to mention Donald Trump saying that Epstein, quote, liked beautiful women, many of them on the younger side. Like, that's a red flag that Donald Trump is saying that. Like, what do you possibly think that he meant besides women that were like scarily young, barely 18 is like what I'd be taking that as. But like, now we obviously know that it was younger age girls that he was into. The whole thing is just like insane and obviously still evolving, but this cannot die down the way that Donald Trump hopes it's going to die down. There's so many moving parts in this. Donald Trump is very involved in the people that, you know, let Epstein go, and the covering up of these, whatever the DOJ does have that can potentially be released, and the lying about Pam Bondi telling him that he's in the files, and like, that's not good. And he is, I really think, just hoping that this flies under the radar and, you know, we all forget about it. Like, you know, moving on to the Texas gerrymandering story, and we can't let that happen. Like, you need to keep hammering this on the head, because he's hoping that by, you know, 2026, 2028, we all just don't bring it up anymore. You know, ultimately, like I said, I don't think that this client list that everybody seems to get all hot and bothered by exists, but I do think, like, you can't sell that to people that have been living in this conspiracy theory land, like, of, oh, there's this client list and it has all these powerful people on it. Like, you're not going to be able to sell, like, oh, there's actually no client list. However, I don't know. There's no good way to go about this, because the crazy people that are, like, very, very convinced that, like, there has to be a client list, like, it exists somewhere, they're never going to believe that there simply is no client list. And, like, that took me a while to be like, well, why wouldn't there, like, be a client list? But, like, think critically about it for a second. Jeffrey Epstein was not, like, keeping a ledger of people he had over to assault girls. Like, that implicates him and everybody else. Like, I feel like the key to being a good leader of a sexual assault ring would be to leave no paper trail, I think. Not that I'm running a sexual assault ring, but, like, you shouldn't leave a paper trail of any sort of crime that you commit. And if you do, like, you're stupid and you deserve to get caught. Like, that's part of why I think that he blackmailed victims so much and, you know, harassed and stalked them, was because they were the key to everything. They could tell you who was there. They could tell you what was done. I don't know. But anyways, do not let this get out of the headlines. And the other thing, one more thing before I leave, Markwayne Mullin got on the news and blamed the plea deal from Alex Acosta, mind you, Trump's cabinet member, on the Obama administration, which was impossible. Obama wasn't the president yet, and Alex Acosta is the one that offered the deal, and he was a Bush appointee. Jake Tapper then corrected him in real time. I don't see this situation as ever having, like, any accountability towards it. However, I think it's turning a lot of people off to Trump. A lot of his loyal supporters, you know, keep in mind, like, this was basically a campaign promise of Trump's. I'm going to release the files. Like, there's going to be transparency, and that's not happening. And especially in something like this, where people are begging for transparency, it's very clear that there were some very elite people that were wrapped up in this, and people are very involved with wanting to know who they were. You know, I think for different reasons, depending on what side of the aisle that you're on, but people want some transparency. And I feel like people that are, for some people, this might be their single issue. Trump says he's going to release the Epstein files. Okay, well, now he's not. So they're probably going to leave him. And, you know, this does make him appear, not that he was trustworthy before, but it makes him appear untrustworthy. And, you know, like, he's out for himself and the elites, which, again, Republicans claim to hate with a passion. So we'll see where the cookie crumbles. But like I said, you can't, like, this needs to be the news story. Like, hammer it into him. Like, all of this stuff coming up, the birthday card, like, that's, I don't want to say concrete evidence, but like it's all this evidence coming out, like showing like a deeper and deeper connection and a deeper and deeper tie between Epstein and Trump. Like you need to hammer that home, that there is this connection, because it's very clear that a lot of the diehard Republicans like are refusing to believe that there was a connection or that somehow they were connected and Donald Trump just never knew anything. Like, I don't know. Like, I like can't even keep up with the conspiracy theories. Anyways, I'm sure there's going to be another bombshell that drops, but I do hope that this gives like a little bit of background in who Epstein was, who he knew, like how he got his start, and like the people that are kind of tied into that. So hopefully now when you're reading news articles that are talking about like the new stuff that's coming out, the names and like the stories and references that they're making don't sound so like, wait, what was that? Anyways, that is all I have for you guys this week. Next week, I'm going to have a guest episode with Danielle Reeve. She is a former diplomat, and she's going to be talking to us about peace building and basically how to be a good person, good Samaritan, and looping in her experience from working overseas in democracy building. It was a great conversation with her. I'm really looking forward to that episode coming out. And then after that, I will go back to having the last week of the month off, and I will try not to have 2 weeks off in a row. That was an oversight on my part. But yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Current Affairs Unfiltered. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, or share it with someone who could use this information. And as always, if you have questions, topic suggestions, or just want to say hi, you can find me on social media at Current Affairs Unfiltered Pod on Instagram, or send me an email at currentaffairs.unfilteredpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Keep asking questions, stay engaged, and thank your lucky stars that you are not a part of the Murdoch family. I will see you guys next week.